There we go. Okay. Now, you might get what you're expecting. Now that I got this thing working right. Anyway, Darren and Edie are away. He expected to be teaching this class this morning, but Edie's mother had to go to the hospital, so they're tending with her. So here we go. And you know where we're going, right? No? All right, Nehemiah. All right. Now, don't get wild on me this morning, and don't, okay? But I've got a question to ask, and all I want is a definition. Okay? What is a conspiracy? Now, don't go anywhere but to the dictionary. What's a conspiracy? There's if you want a microphone, it's available.
You do want a microphone.
Okay. Nobody's going to play this morning. All right. How about a few words to describe it? By definition, it's secretive. It's an attempt by a group, or it could be just an individual or small group of individuals attempting to do something unlawful or harmful. All right? Conspiracy. What's the purpose of a conspiracy? What's somebody trying to do when they do that? Change. Okay, it's one thing. Undermine. Okay, another one. Good one. Defraud. Okay, defraud. Oh, I heard a bunch. What was it? Stir the pot. Okay. How about ruin one's reputation? Ruin a reputation? It can go all the way, can't it? All the way to being physically harmful. To being physically harmful. I remember back in the 90s, mid-90s in Detroit, the plot to at the Winter Olympics. You remember Nancy Kerrigan? And yeah, we were there when that was going on. The plot to get her out of the Winter Olympics and so on. Well, that plot failed, of course, but anyway, I remember that. But I said we weren't going to those kind of things. But conspiracies come in all shapes and sizes. And the only reason I bring that up this morning and we want to define that word is because it's found in our text in Nehemiah chapter 4. So if you want to be turning to Nehemiah chapter 4, and we'll be studying there this morning about a conspiracy and how Nehemiah handled the situation. Just by way of review, since we don't get to this study but every so often, or whatever. Nehemiah had heard that Jerusalem was in a bad way. The walls weren't being built after they've come back from captivity, and just things aren't going well in Jerusalem. And that upsets him extremely. And he prays and he fasts, and this becomes a pattern, more the prayer side of things. This becomes a great pattern for Nehemiah and his life. And he approaches the king, and more prayer, and the king gets on board with his plan. Nehemiah gives glory to God, and that's another part of Nehemiah and his working and his plan, giving God the glory. And so the king provides him the means and all that he needs to go back to Jerusalem and try to get things sorted out and get things working again in Jerusalem. And the first thing he does is he plans, he strategizes. He does this at night when nobody can see what's going on and they can't detect him and what he might be up to. And so he does his strategizing, and then in chapter 3 of Nehemiah, he sets things in order. He starts to work his plan. You go here and you go there, and you remember we had a map on the wall about how he went about, and he chose different groups to be at different places, and people, some were by their homes and some were by their workplaces, and some groups together because of who they were as far as workers were concerned, craftsmen and things of that nature. And he worked all that, and he assigned the workers, and it looked like everything was just going. And then we come to these characters, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, and they start throwing monkey wrenches into the situation. And at first, these antagonists attempt psychological warfare. Let's just be a thorn in their side, and let's try and just discourage them enough to where they're going to quit. And that's what they wanted. That's what these antagonists wanted to have happen. They wanted to quit the work of rebuilding the wall and all of those things. But this psychological warfare failed. And so we have words about Sanballat, how he had convinced these others, Tobiah and Geshem and the other nations that were going to help him. And he had gotten next to them, but he couldn't disturb the Israelites. They heard, these antagonists had heard what was going on. And it was being pretty successful, really, when you think about it. And we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute, too. But they were being quite successful. But because of that, they became, in chapter 2, irritated, disturbed. By the 19th verse of chapter 2, they begin to ridicule, they begin to mock. And then by chapter 4 and verse 1, they get angry. They become incensed. And then by verse 7, anger again. Now when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites heard that the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on, and that the breaches began to be closed, they were very angry. Very angry. All of them, here's our word, all of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. Okay? So here's their next plot. Another word for conspiracy, I suppose, to conspire against, to plot against. Here they've come up with it, and this time they're going to cause a disturbance, hoping to get the work to stop. They're going to stir up some trouble. But that's the antagonists. But what about the Israelites? What's their frame of mind? We just go back one verse to verse 6. So, let's go back to the very last sentence or few words in verse 5. They've demoralized the builders. That was part of Nehemiah's prayer. But it didn't stop them nonetheless. So, we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height. So they're half done already. And here's why. For the people had a mind to work. The people had a mind to work. Some of your translations may say heart, had a heart to work. Okay, question, and again, just short, kind of one-word answers kind of thing. What is included in that short phrase, had a mind to work? What's that mean? What's included in all of that?
Dedicated.
Dedicated. Purpose. Desire. Motivation. Devoted. Okay, let's see. Are you getting all my words? Yeah, kind of. Perseverance. Determined. Excited. There's another one for motivated, I guess. Excited. Passionate. Yes, passionate. I'm sorry if I'm not getting all these words. Enthusiastic, energetic. What's another word for purposed? Focused. That's what I'm looking for. That was the word I was looking for. Purposed is good, but I like focused, because even though it's a one-word answer, which is right, which is what I asked for, I see focused going two ways, and yet it's not going two ways. Okay? And here's what I mean by that. They were focused on the task. But whose task was it? Was it their task? Yeah, I mean, they had to do the work. But it was God's plan. It was God's plan. So they're just working God's plan. And so focused, can you see it going two ways? But actually those two ways are just one. Those two ways are going one way. All right, and so the people had a mind or a heart for this work. They were enthusiastic, excited, energetic, focused, determined, all those that we've come up with this morning. All right, there's another one word that we haven't come up with yet that kind of sums all of this together. They had a mind to work. Unified. Unity is the word I was looking for there. They had this spirit, or they were working with the power of unity. Now, the verse we read says they were half done already. They're half done. Now, I'm not going to tell you. You probably know, and you know where to find it. So let's go ahead and just spill the beans. It only took them 52 days total to get the whole thing done. And they're halfway now. So, I don't know, time-wise, what's that? Maybe a month into this thing? They've been working at this thing for maybe a month? I don't know. But anyway, because in 52 days they're going to get done. But they've already tried, these guys, antagonists, have already tried to stop them once by just discouraging them. And now here they're conspiring to come and fight this time, okay? But let's not get too far ahead of this thing, because I want to pause just a minute on this unity idea, okay? The spirit of oneness, purpose, direction, commitment, love. Isn't it amazing what can be done by a united group that has one mind? What's that sound like to you? To me, it sounds like we've got an Old Testament picture. We got an Old Testament picture right here of how the New Testament church operates, or should operate. Right? Can you see that? Or is it just me? Here's this Old Testament picture. Because, well, let's look at Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 16. We could go all the way back to verse 11, I suppose, in chapter 4 of Ephesians, where he gave some apostles, some prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, for the equipping of the saints, the work of the service, building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. Drop down to verse 16. From whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. Isn't that a group of people that have a mind to work, that have a spirit of oneness, a spirit of unity, a designed focus, and they're excited about it and enthusiastic. They're motivated. We got an Old Testament picture of just how God intended the church to work. And we've got examples of it happening, don't we? You don't have to go far in the book of Acts, chapter 2, right at the end there, of how the church was operating there. And then next, we could just go a page or two over to chapter 4 of Acts and verse 32. The congregation of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Not one of them claimed that anything belonging to him was his own, but all things were common property to them. So there it is. There's the Old Testament picture coming to life in Acts chapter 2. Paul would, as he visited the different churches and congregations on his tours, would promote this unity, this oneness. And then he'd write about it when he wrote them letters and things. He didn't like what he saw in Corinth when he first got there. He said, there's divisions among you. And then a little bit later in the letter, he says, your behavior is such that even the Gentiles don't behave like this. And so he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 11, be like-minded. Be like-minded. Have that same purpose in all of this. Uses the same language in Philippians 2, in the first two verses. The same mind. Have the same mind. And then he illustrates it by saying, and that mind is the mind of Christ. Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. That's the mind. And so, George has a comment over here. Can we get George a mic? Here it comes, George.
David, I'm reminded of how you make a rope. I learned how in the Scouts, but I'm talking about an old-fashioned rope, not this fancy stuff they make it out of now. But it's just fibers from vines, and they take those fibers and put them together. You can lay those fibers together, and they're stronger than they are by themselves, just laying them together.
Uh-huh.
But if you start twisting those fibers, where they start intertwining among themselves and get tighter and tighter and tighter, they are so strong you can't, it all doubles and triples and multiplies the strength of those fibers because they are so intertwined together.
Exactly. Solomon had something to say about that too, didn't he? Where was that? I didn't plan on using that one, so it's not got it written down. But a cord of, what does he say? A cord of something is. Anyway, Solomon says that. Just what George said. Okay. But this idea of the spirit of unity, that's a universal principle. It's not just an Old Testament picture that happens to be found again in the New Testament in the church. But I hate to go to sports again and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, a football team. Think about a football team. You've got your offense and you've got your defense, and yet it takes both working together at their peak performance to win the game. I was thinking about baseball as well. And baseball's a little bit different than football. Football, you got, these 11 guys and these 11 guys, and then they kind of switch places on the field every once in a while in order to get the game done. Well, baseball's a little bit different, at least in my mind. You've got 9 guys that part of the game, they're off the field. Other part of the game, they're on the field. And so, but it's the same 9 guys, or roughly, you can substitute, and I'm not going there. But you've got these 9 guys. But instead, like football, you've got 11 that are defense and 11 offense. The baseball guys, they're at one time defense, and the next time offense. The same 9 guys working it all together and becoming the team that they need to be. All right. What can happen? What can happen when God's people utilize human talents and God's power and wisdom? Well, we've already seen what happens, because back in chapter 2, that was part of the emphasis that we were looking at, was that God's plan and man's talents and man's wisdom were working together. And that's what it takes. That's what this part of unity is. And that's why I wanted, when we looked at the idea of focus, why I wanted us to look in 2 directions. There's the task, and then there's God. But if it's God's task, then we're not working in 2 directions. It's all the same, one direction. Well, this is what's going on in Jerusalem. Okay, this was what was happening in Jerusalem. And the enemies sensed this going on. And when you think about it, and they knew, when they realized that here was a focus on God's plan and the people's heart to work, it's no wonder they felt threatened. And their plans to demoralize had failed. And so the psychological warfare didn't work. So they've got 2 choices. The enemy now has 2 choices. They can either back off and regroup, or they can attack militarily and just get in there and fight it out and show them who's boss and get it done, kind of thing. All right? So that's what they're going to do. So anyway, they've decided, verse 8, obviously, we read that they decided they were going to come and fight against Jerusalem and cause this disturbance. Well, who are they and where are they coming from? Sanballat and the Samaritans are going to come from the north. Remember the map kind of thing? We had the wall around the city. Well, Sanballat and the Samaritans are coming from the north. Tobiah and the Ammonites are coming from the east. Geshem and the Arabs are coming from the south. The Ashdodites are coming from the west. All right. So there's the threat. All right. There's the threat that's going to happen here. Oh, I really like verse 9. I really like verse 9. Okay? And here it is. The counterattack against this conspiracy. You don't have to read only 2 words of verse 9 and you get it. But God. Those are the only 2 words you need to know. But God. We prayed to God. Okay? That's Nehemiah's number 1 go-to, right? And so here's this corporate threat being met with corporate prayer. I want you to notice something particular about verse 9, though, let's read it. But we prayed to our God, and because of them we set up a guard against them day and night. If I'm not mistaken, and if I haven't read this thing wrong through Nehemiah to this point, this is the first time that we get the idea that some of Nehemiah is rubbing off on the people. And that's what he's wanting. That's what should happen. Because if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time when it suggests that more than Nehemiah was praying. In the book of Nehemiah, in his journal of what's going on in his life at this particular time, he talks about, I prayed, and I prayed about going to see the king, and then the king said thus and so I prayed again, and on it prays. This is the first time where he says, we, indicating that, okay, he's got the people behind him now. The Jews are, they're hanging in with him, okay? And so that's the implication here. And it must have been a great moment for Nehemiah. He's making his journal about what's going on. And in his journal, he gets to write, but we prayed to God. I like that. I really like that part. All right, but now think about it too. He says, we prayed to God. Were the results automatic and instant and whatever? No. Yeah, right. They still had a part. All right. And here again, the people are learning from Nehemiah. See, back in chapter 2, we had seen where Nehemiah taught them this idea of balance. Yeah, they got to do the praying to God, but then they've got to get their hands dirty themselves. They've got to work with God. And that's the way it is in the church today. We are fellow workers with God. We're not doing this by ourselves. We pray to God, and then we got the picture last time, didn't we? Praising God and hand me another brick. Same thing going on here again. Same thing I see happening again. And so prayer and hard work go together. We prayed to our God, and because of them we set up a guard against them day and night. All right, so that's what they're doing of this thing. Now, and remember, time-wise, they're half done, and it's going to be all done in 52 days. That's chapter 6 and verse 15, if you want to find out where that's at. So, half time, I don't know, maybe a month in, and here we are. But, there's that word again. It just, the great eraser, but. Just everything that comes ahead, you just wiped out. There's a new set of problems. New set of problems. Let's read verse 10, 11, and 12. Thus in Judah it was said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing, yet there's much rubbish. We ourselves are unable to rebuild the wall. Okay. Our enemies said, they will not know or see until we come among them, kill them, put a stop to the work. And when the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times, they will come up against us from every place where you may turn. Oh, wow. They're the talk of the town. They're the talk of Judah. Judah's saying, oh, they're getting tired. They're not going to be able to do this. The garbage, the rubbish is building up. You know how when you build a wall and when you see a building going up and the brickwork and all the mortar, that gathers at the foot of the wall and all the rest of that stuff, and it looks a mess. It just looks worse than when you started, because you started with a nice clean patch of dirt, and where you started to lay the block and the brick and had this foundation going up, and then all this rubbish gathers, and it starts piling up, and you think, oh man, this is worse than when we started. And so you can get discouraged. So they were the talk of the town. There was all this going on. Their enemies were talking about it against them. And then their neighbors, the Jews from outlying areas. Remember, they had some that were from the outlying areas. They were day workers, weren't they, on the wall? There was a group that came in by day. They weren't just living in Jerusalem, but they came in by day to help rebuild this wall. So they're going back home at night, and they're hearing from neighbors away from everything that, and Nehemiah is very specific. He says, we heard this 10 times. That, you're not going to do this. And what did they say about where they were coming from? It says at the end of verse 12, come up against us from every place where you may turn. You look this way, I'm stopped. They're coming. Oh, so I'll go this way. Oh, can't go that way. Here they come. Any way you look, they're coming at you. So here's the situation. They've got this physical and psychological fatigue going on. They're working all day and all night. You see, Sanballat, Tobiah, and all those guys, their first crack at stopping them didn't work. So they can bring in fresh recruits now. But what about the Jews building the wall? They're working night and day. Verse 13. Then I stationed men in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places, and I stationed the people in families with their swords and spears and bows. So here they are. They're doing double duty now. They're working on the wall, and they're protecting themselves. So the burden's getting more and more and more. And so here they are. New tactics. They're half done, but emotionally, the foundations are crumbling. If it looked hopeless, or if it looked impossible before, it's hopeless now. All right, and so here they are. It had to be a difficult decision for Nehemiah, don't you think? I mean, remember, too, from chapter 3, he's got families working together. Well, here comes the threat of war, and he's still grouping families. And so these guys are protecting themselves with swords and everything else, and their family's right there with them. Man, that's got to be tough. Not only are we having to worry about living together, now we got to worry about maybe dying together, if it comes to that. And so, anyway, Nehemiah sees what's going on. When I saw their fear, verse 14, when I saw their fear, I rose and spoke to the nobles and the rest of the people. And here's the next verse that's really good. We got to get time for this last couple of verses here. But anyway, here it is. Notice what Nehemiah says. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is awesome and great, who is great and awesome, and fight. All right, pause right there. Don't read the rest of the verse yet. Okay? Don't be afraid. I don't know. First of all, Nehemiah doesn't have to be afraid because he's got to be strong and bold, and he's got to stand there and tell them, don't be afraid of these that are coming. Don't be afraid. And so, don't be afraid. Reminds me of David and Goliath, of course, and Saul wanted, and David says, I'm not afraid. I've met the lion, I've met the bear, and Goliath, I'm now ready for you. Nehemiah was kind of like that, I suppose. God had granted him success before the king, and so far he's been successful with the Israelites. Nehemiah has to be a strong example here at this time. But it's time for reflection, past victories and so on. He says, remember. Remember God. Awesome, great and awesome. Back in chapter 1 and verse 5, he had said, God is the Lord. He's great and awesome. He's faithful. He's the covenant God. Reminds me as a Christian, Paul's admonition in Romans. If God is for us, who can be against us? Would it happen again? They prayed. They're praying. Would God step in again? Would God fight with them? Would God grant? Well, he did when Nehemiah went to Artaxerxes. Why, when you think about it, why is the wall half built in such a short period of time already? Has God not been around? He has. So anyway, another success, verse 15. That's the last bell, right? That's too bad. Anyway, verse 15, we got to finish this, because here's the victory. When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, then all of us returned to the wall, each one to his own work. There's the answer. God did step in once again, didn't he? God stepped in once again. The enemies found out that Nehemiah had found out their conspiracy. So it wasn't secret anymore. And he found that all out. And there we have it. All right. Principles for us. Well, let me just summarize this in one thing. Nehemiah's philosophy, and this is the best thing we can stop with today, I think. He trusted God. He strategized. He worked hard. He motivated people. He faced the problems head on. And then he gave God the glory. When the enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, it wasn't Nehemiah and the Israelites. God had frustrated their plan. So here's Nehemiah's philosophy. It's bookended, if you will, with God. He's praying to God, trusting in God, and then at the other end, he's giving God the glory. It works. It works for unified people, for people that have a mind to work. Okay, thank you. There's more lessons in that little